Hi everybody, welcome to Lord of the Reads. So this is a channel that I created to pretty much babble about all kinds of bookish things because I'm almost positive that my family is done hearing me talk about books 24/7, so here we go. This is my solution. So, since this is new, I figured we'd start by taking a delve into my bookish habits and tastes. And I figured that we'd start by talking about my 10 favorite books of 2020. Now, 2020 has been a great reading year for me because, well, there hasn't been much else to do, so works. So, pretty much, this was also the year that I first started reading YA, and it's become one of my favorite genres now. So, most of the books on this list are going to be YA with a few middle grades sprinkled in. So, let's just get started with the first book. So, number 10 on this list is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. And this is a story about a young girl named Alina who lives in this country, and in this world, people can bend certain elements. And also, there's a place in this country called the Fold, and it's this place of darkness where evil things hide. And it's the only place where you can go through to trade with other countries. So Alina has to go through this fold with a group of people to get essential resources back to her country. And they get attacked. And something happens after the attack, and people think that she has some kind of unique ability. So this is a YA fantasy, and this was my first book that I read by Leigh Bardugo. I'd heard amazing things about her writing, and it was absolutely amazing. So number 9 is Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. And this was one of the earlier YA books that I read this year. It is a YA fantasy retelling, so it's kind of a creative twist on the Evil Queen story. So it's about this girl who is destined to do something great. She doesn't know what yet, but she's destined to do something great. So she sets out to the palace. This story is set in an Asian culture. So she heads out to the palace, and she wants to become the Empress. So that is what she thinks that she's destined for. So she heads out, and she has to try to become Empress, and she has to go through all these different kinds of challenges. This book is not heavy on magic, so it's not super dense. The other thing about this book is that I did not like it at first. The first half of the book was slower paced, which, considering that I had just come from reading a whole bunch of faster paced books, I did not like the first half of it. But the second half, where we actually get into some of the magic and the action, it really helped pull the story up. So it was really good. So number 8 is Mr. Lemoncello and the Titanium Ticket. And this is a middle grade about a young boy named Simon. And he lives in this town where there is a game-making company owned by this wacky Mr. Lemoncello. And Mr. Lemoncello is hosting a set of games. And if you win the game, you get a titanium ticket, which takes you to another level of games where you have a chance to win a prize. And this was a fantastic book. I read all of the Mr. Lemoncello books up to this point, and this book just came out this year. And it was an amazing way to sum up so far what's happening in the story. So all the other books had other characters that the series started out with, and it went with those characters, and then this book was the first one to introduce someone new. And it was amazing. Because they introduced a new character, I wasn't quite sure how I would like it, but it was done wonderfully. So, next, number 7, is The Unteachables by Gordon Korman. That was a book that I read pretty early on in the year. it's a middle grade, and it's about this girl who moves to a new state, and she has to enter into school, but she gets put into the Unteachables class, which is the class of kids who are challenged in their learning. And she's not supposed to be there, but that's where she gets put. And the story is about her integrating into that group and with the teacher, and it was a really funny, a very humorous story that was amazing. Book 6 is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. And this book was the first YA book that I read this year, and one of the first YA books that I read in general. It is a fantasy, YA, retelling, romance, sci-fi, a little bit of everything, and it was really good. So you follow a girl named Cinder who lives in New Beijing. So this is after a war happened and the world was wiped out, and all these countries were rebuilt. So she lives in New Beijing, and she is a mechanic, but she's also a cyborg. And a prince, the Prince of New Beijing, comes and asks her to fix something. And through that, she gets sucked into this whole plot, and all kinds of, sometimes scary for the characters, but some really cool things happen, and it was an amazing book. So, number 5 is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is a YA dystopian fantasy with also some sci-fi elements, and it was amazing. So you follow this young girl named Katniss, who her little sister gets called to do the Hunger Games, and the Hunger Games is a game that the characters have to do every year, and they have to pick a boy and a girl from each district of this country, and they have to go fight until there's one left standing. So Katniss, her little sister, gets called to do the Hunger Games, and Katniss throws herself onto the stage and says that she will volunteer instead of her sister. So she goes and she has to fight in this Hunger Game. And this was a difficult book to read as far as some of the elements, but it was wonderfully done, and the small parts of romance that were thrown in there were also really beneficial and helped the story move along better. So, number 4 is The False Prince by Jennifer A. Nielsen. And this is a middle grade book. It's also a kind of fantasy, but not magic. It has no magic in it. So it's about this boy who's an orphan, and his name is Sage. And he gets called upon by someone named Connor. And Connor has a plan to where he's going to use one of these children that he finds in the orphanages, and he's going to pick one of them and try to say that he is the prince. And he's going to try to take the throne that way. And this was another one of the books that I read early on in the year. And I didn't know how I'd like it at first, because most of the fantasies that I like reading are magic heavy. But this one was not, but it was still amazing. The plot was done wonderfully, and there was beautiful writing throughout, which carried the story along really well. So now we get into the top 3 books that I read in 2020. So, number 3 is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This is a contemporary romance. So it is a real story with no, or not a real story, it's set in the real world with no magic or anything that you wouldn't find in the world today. And it's about this girl named Hazel, and she has cancer. And she meets this boy named Augustus, who got over and recovered from cancer, and they fall in love, and the story's about their love story through her having cancer and him having recovered. So this book is very heavy in some things like suicide and depression, which can be hard topics to read about, but the writing was beautiful, and the way that those topics were covered was very interesting and informative as to how they happen in the real world. And it was a wonderful, very emotional read at some points, so it was very good. So my second favorite book of the year was Scythe by Neal Shusterman, and this was a fantastic book. It is a YA dystopian and sci-fi, and it's about this girl and this boy who live in this world where death has been conquered. No one can die of natural causes. So in order to keep the population down, they have to implement something called gleaning, where a select few people named scythes have to go and kill people periodically to keep the population down. So these two children are called to be scythe apprentices, where they're going to learn how to glean people. And this was a very interesting story to read. First off, it was very philosophical as to what happens to people when their life no longer has a limit. And that was really interesting to read about, the psychology behind it, the philosophy, and things like that. And then the parts of sci-fi and the technology, it was all super cool to read about, at the same time being slightly disturbing in some parts, but overall very interesting. So, my favorite book of 2020 was Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. Now, this was another book that came out this year, and it is a YA fantasy. So, it's set in a world where there are demons and there are angels. And you have people who are shadow hunters, who are created by the angels to go kill off the demons so that the regular people can live free of that danger. So you follow this girl who just moved to England, and she is a shadow hunter, and she has to become part of this new group of shadow hunters that work in England. And her father is accused of some bad things that could cause him to be put to death in this world. So she is trying to integrate herself socially while using that influence to try to save her father. And from there she gets thrown into all kinds of crazy plot twists, and all kinds of both disturbing and great things happen. There's also small amounts of romance throughout that really help to bring the story along through the action and the heavier parts. So those are my top 10 books of 2020. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite books of 2020 were, or least favorite, or just what books you're reading at the moment. So make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!